So we're going to start it up. So thanks for coming tonight. Production level Spring here using Spring Boot. The top will be Boot equal code with Spring. We're very lucky to have Josh Long. He's a developer advocate for Spring. I've been fortunate enough to work with him all week. He's a scholar and a gentleman, knows Spring inside out. So I'll turn it over to him.
Hey, thanks guys. So the pleasure's all mine. You guys have a really cool CD. I don't know if you know yet. This place is awesome. The miracle notwithstanding, you know. Right, so my information's up there. If you have questions, comments, feedback, whatever, I'm happy to take anything and everything here. But if you leave this room more confused than when you entered, at least now you have the course. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, so Twitter, email, starbuxman. How many of you have Twitter? Folks. Okay. As you might guess, I'm a big fan. I wrote 4 books on it. I'm a committer on several of the projects. I have a couple of videos that I hawk. I'm also the idiot that tried to help Jean-Claude Van Damme cloud compute. That did not go so well. We tried in Bulgaria after a lot of alcohol to make it work, you know. I saw him there, and I ambled over and sort of spoke to him in French. I was like, I'm a big fan, you know. I don't need to do movies, but would you take a photo with me? And we did, and I tried to help explain it. You can see the sort of dissatisfaction with his whole life in his face right there, you know. So okay, moving on. We're going to talk about. Actually, before I go on, I wanted to demystify one thing. I work for Pivotal. We're in Pivotal. The Pivotal office is here in Toronto, former home of Extreme Labs, and obviously the continued home of Extreme Labs. The office is sort of Pivotal. Pivotal is a new adventure. It's a company that we started last April. It is a company formed in whole part from assets from VMware and EMC. So how many of you have heard of well, Spring, right? Have any of you heard of Spring? Just curious. Okay, good. What about Tomcat, Apache Tomcat? Okay. Redis? Redis is a distributed data structure server. It's used by some small mom and pop companies like Twitter to sort of manage scale. RabbitMQ, anybody here know about RabbitMQ? Used by like the likes of Huffington Post, for example. Hadoop, of course, we've got a Hadoop distribution, good stuff. Grails and Groovy and Grail even. Right, so a lot of nice pieces under one roof, including, and Cloud Foundry. How many of you have heard of Cloud Foundry? Who can forget Cloud Foundry? The open source platform as a service. It's like Heroku without the lock-in or the stuff, you know, it's a neat technology. And so we're all in it together, a lot of open source Apache 2 license goodness under one roof. The goal is to build a, sort of company and a platform dedicated to building today's kind of applications, or even better, tomorrow's kinds of applications. We don't believe that these kinds of applications are being well served by existing sort of technologies, so we're trying to do something about that, right? A big part of that, of course, was the user experience, you know. Spring is the glue for all these different technologies. Spring is the component model by which you consume all these great pieces, and a whole lot more, you know. How many of you are Java types, Java developers? Or JVM developers, I suppose is the more fashionable thing to say. We understand that Spring can be a little daunting. Spring is a very big portfolio of technologies. It can be a little overwhelming for somebody getting into it. And we sort of said to ourselves last year, okay, we've got this new charter, this new mission, this new adventure. We can make things better for people. How do we do this? And that, several different pieces have come together as a consequence of this discussion. One of them was a brand new website, a brand new home on the web. It's spring.io. Okay? This website, if you go to springsource.org, you'll be 302 redirected to this website. I'm a fan. The website has a lot going for it. So, for example, here's the website. There's all the usual suspects. If you go to the docs page, for example, you'll find that it's very, very simple to find what you need for given technologies. For example, Spring Boot. You click on Spring Boot, right there you see a link to the GitHub repository where the source code lives. You see a link to the website where you can learn more about Spring Boot, for example. And here there's a quick start, there's a also the documentation as well, so you can see which one is current, you can find the API, etc. Right? So we want this to be very, very easy to get started with. There's maybe coordinates that you're going to need to be able to get started with it, for example. And then relevant links, so sample projects, getting started guides, right? External links that you might care about. The getting started guides, I think, are actually one of the best parts of this website. If you go to spring.io/guides, you'll find here a complement of guides, each introducing one specific technology, one specific task in terms of Spring Boot, or in terms of Spring. The idea is that we want you to be able to pick something that you want to do and not be overwhelmed by all sort of the possibility. Just one thing, right? So perhaps I want to build a RESTful web service, or handle file uploads in my web application, or talk to RabbitMQ, or use a NoSQL data store, not only SQL data store like Neo4j or Gemfire or MongoDB or something like that, or talk to a social service provider like Twitter or Facebook, okay, or catch data with Gemfire, or do a lot of different things here, right? These are all different kinds of guides, and they're not necessarily Spring specific. Many of these guides serve technologies that people in our ecosystem are likely going to be using as well, but that we don't directly influence. For example, if you're building a Spring application today, there's a good chance you might be using REST or some sort of HTTP-based service model. It's very natural to then want to consume those services from, for example, jQuery or Angular.js, or iOS, right? So, or Android or whatever. So these are all guides on how to do that kind of stuff, right? These are very sort of thorough, hopefully simple to follow guides. If you look at one guide, any guide, oops, oh yeah, there you go. You'll see that these guides are all sort of, hopefully there's no magic, hopefully there's nothing mysterious about it. We don't have any assumptions, except that perhaps you can read English and Java code, right? And Java, it's sort of, even that part is, it's getting less and less required. So these guides explain what you're going to try and solve. When you follow this guide, they should take 10 to 15 minutes to get through the end. They explain what you're going to need, JDK 1.6 or later, build tool, an IDE, and we of course are going to link you to our our open source free Eclipse distribution called the STS, but believe me, you can work with anything you want. There's a GitHub repository where you can find a complete and initial example for all these different tutorials, all these different guides. And then there's all the nauseating details of every little step that you're going to need to follow to be able to get these examples to work, right? Here's the build structure, here's the build file, here's the dependencies you're going to need, etc., right? And here's what you're going to expect to get back from a result, from our examples, from our output. So this is hopefully 10 to 15 minutes long. I recommend you take 10 to 15 minutes every day, get yourself a lunch, and then take another 10 to 15 minutes and get yourself some mental nourishment. Follow these guys, learn a new trick, If you have questions, we're always happy to hear, always happy to help. So these guys are all in terms of Spring Boot. Indeed, the website itself is an open source website that we've put out there, so Spring.io, right? You can find the code for the website itself. It's a Spring application that runs on top of Cloud Foundry. Okay, so that's called Sagan, named for the scientist, Carl Sagan, who sought to demystify the very universe itself, right? And we kind of liken Enterprise Java to that ambitious task. Okay, so a lot of pieces here. Again, we're hoping that these are going to be very useful. These guides are all Spring Boot centric. The website itself is Spring Boot. So that brings us to the question, what is Spring Boot? Spring Boot is a focusing of attention. It's the start point for the Spring platform, right? And you might notice that last word, Spring platform. When we talk about Spring these days, it's very easy to sort of make these arbitrary lines in the sand with regard to which project does what and where and how valuable or trustworthy it is. But that's an arbitrary distinction, and it has been for since forever, basically. The people that work on core Spring are the same people that work on Spring Batch, that work on Spring Integration, Spring Security, etc. There's no quality there's no quality measure that suddenly just drops because it's not Spring favorite core. These other projects are other projects specifically because they serve different use cases. They're not they're not going to be underpinning other projects as much. The core Spring framework is a component model. It's a base. It moves at a glacial pace. Because it doesn't need to move that fast because these other technologies will do the job for it. If you want to, for example, work in the wild west of big data, you have a lot of different technologies out there that are moving very quickly. You can't wait for the new Spring release to catch up with that. You want to see a release as it's relevant, as it's happening. Same thing for the social APIs. You want to talk to Facebook? There are people at Facebook that spend time finding ways to break your code. They spend a lot of time building an API and then tweaking it so that if you send a JSON structure, it won't work tomorrow. This is their job. They enjoy it. People laugh at you. And we have to keep our bindings for Facebook up to date. It's a full-time job. There are people losing hair for this. You understand? Twitter, so GitHub, all these different APIs. You don't want to wait a year for this stuff to happen. You need to see the relevant results now. So this is more about timeline. It's more about continuity with the ecosystem that these projects serve. That said, they can be and should be, and we encourage you to, consume them all together. So you'll hear about something called the Spring IO platform going forward. Actually, this is fairly imminent, so keep your eyes tuned to Spring.io. But we've decided to break this into two different pieces here. We have the IO platform, the IO foundation. This describes all the sort of like libraries, frameworks, and bits that you might have already known about. And then we have the IO execution layer. And this describes projects that can manage a process, things that can launch a process. So, Spring XD is our turnkey big data solution for managing sort of like ingestion, stream processing, data integration style workloads. Spring, Rails, of course, is our Groovy language centric rapid application development framework based on Spring and other pieces. And of course, Spring Boot is how I would recommend you start your application with Spring in mind, right? It is a way of, it's your chance to sort of pair program with the people on the Spring team. We looked at the common cases for Spring. We looked at the way people are using it. And we said, yes, Spring is flexible. Yes, Spring gives you the choices and the ability to plug in different variables to these equations to get different results. But being honest, let's just, between you and me and the wall, there's often a common case default configuration that would do just fine. There's often something that's out there that would work in the 80% case. And if there's not, then it's pretty easy to override this thing, especially with some of the stuff that we've introduced in Spring 4, which makes it dead simple to create beans that are conditional. You can define a bean that only exists based on some other condition. Is Mercury in retrograde? Or is there another bean in the context of that same type, etc.? So we've got this ability now to create a really, really elastic sort of solution where it does something for you, like useful defaults by default, but you can override and plug into that as much as you want. So Spring Boot is your chance to pair program with all these engineers on the Spring team. Imagine being able to sit right next to Jürgen Haller, the lead from this core Spring framework, the guy that's been, he's written more code in core Spring than any other engineer. Imagine being able to sit next to him and ask him questions as you're programming. Why fuss? Why not just have him write it once and get it right and then you're done? What about if you could ask Rob Winch, the Spring security lead, how to do certain kinds of integrations for security? Again, why fuss? Just let him do it and reuse that. So Spring Boot is all about making the common cases easier and then making it so easy to plug in where appropriate. When we talk about Spring IO, it's important to note that we're actually going to be releasing a harmonized, what's called a bill of materials BOM. Okay, this is a Maven dependency. It's a Maven aggregate dependency that you can use that keeps equalized sort of versions across all these different projects stable for you. So if you consume the Spring IO BOM, it's like a super dependency management thing. You don't bring down everything. It doesn't download the internet or anything. But all the versions are stipulated for you. So if you want to use Spring Batch and Spring Innovation, and they share a common dependency that's 0.1 versions off or something like that, that's no more. You can be sure that if you consume the Spring IO BOM, that you're going to get the right version, and it's going to work across the different ecosystem projects. And this doesn't just apply to our projects. It applies to common third-party libraries, like, for example, a JSR 303 bean validation implementation, or file upload support, or Hibernate, or Jackson for marshalling and so on. Right? We've taken care of making sure that all this stuff is tested, stipulated, and stable.
So if you depend on ours, then we'll make sure that if you depend on these other ones, you don't need to specify a version. It just works. The benefit of this, of course, is that you can trust that if you upgrade your Spring I/O revision later on, all the other pieces will come with you, and they'll just work, right? So say, in some amount of years or time, Spring 5 comes out or whatever. You're going to update your Spring I/O BOM, and all the other pieces will go with you, right? So that's a very nice thing to have. And of course, you can see there's a lot of nice pieces. There's a lot of nice sort of vertical specific functionality. They have support for big data access, not so big data access, super teeny tiny data access, security, batch processing, integration. I mean, how many of you guys do integration? Like taking one system to another, typical web method to X-way, these kind of things. It's a pain. It's not fun. What about batch processing? I work in a lot of, I talk to a lot of financial services customers, a lot of big banks, these kinds of people. Now, just between you and me, I'll tell you a dirty little secret. You go into a lot of these places, and on the first floor, you find the doe-eyed, enthusiastic, young Java developers. They're happy. They're naive, but they're happy. And then on the second floor, you find the graybeards, the COBOL programmers with psoriasis around the nipples, These guys will never, ever be fired. They will have to die in their chairs for them to be free of that job. They run the world. They run the roost. And that's because they control the mainframes. Batch processing is hard. Why? Why, oh why, would you want to use IBM in case? So Spring Batch, for example, is a great solution. There's a lot of pieces here. And we wanted to make it as easy as possible to consume these pieces. So Spring Boot is about making it easy to consume these pieces. We're going to go ahead and start actually consuming now. So that was my mandatory 3 slides. That's enough of this here. So, getting started. How many of you are Eclipse people? Eclipsans? IntelliJ people? Is that one guy using NetBeans here? He follows me. Are you here, George? Okay. Good. We won't talk about NetBeans. So, there's a lot of different ways to go. You can, of course, use our free open source Eclipse distribution called Spring Tool Suite. It's a fine choice. It's a superset of the latest and greatest Java EE distribution. We have people on staff who have lost hair for you. Their job is to take Eclipse and play whack-a-mole with all the crazy bugs and security patches and weirdness that happens every release. And they make sure that you have a nice, clean, working distribution. And then they add niceties that should be inside of the default Eclipse distribution. Like, for example, Java 8 support was available, and Gradle support, and all these things. And before Git was available in Eclipse by default, we had it in STS. We try and keep ahead of the curve. So that's definitely one way to go. And if you do that, there's niceties for that as well. Another way to go is just to go start.spring.io, right? Start.spring.io, and you hit this initializer. This initializer is kind of a boring little form. You fill out your Maven group or your Gradle build group and your artifact ID. Specify the demo, the name of the project, and you specify some sort of description. Specify the package that you want to use, and then, more usefully, you specify the kind of workload that you want to work with, right? The kind of workload that you want to support in this application. So, for example, these aren't necessarily project or technology specific. They are workload specific. Suppose I want to handle I want to build a web application. That might include REST, it might include form validation and file uploads, it might include MVC and HTML and all these kinds of things. Suppose I want to use TimeLeaf, which is a templating library. It's sort of like JSP if JSP was from the future in 30 years and JSP didn't have all the legacy crap in it. JPA, this is a pretty, it's a pretty popular choice. Are you guys using JPA for SQL-based data access? Yeah, it's fairly ubiquitous. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that there's no controversy in choosing that. And then you can say, okay, I want to build a Maven project as opposed to just downloading a regular Maven POM or a Gradle configuration or versus a Gradle project. I'm going to go ahead and say that I want a jar, that I want to use Java 8, and that I want to use Java, not Groovy. You might be wondering what the Groovy thing is about. Okay, so I'll go ahead and generate this. I'll show you the Groovy thing first. I should mention this application itself is a Spring Boot application written in Groovy. So the initializer is Spring Boot written in Groovy. Spring Boot is consumable from any JVM language, but we've got some nice integrations for Groovy in particular. So if I go to the desktop here, and I'm going to very quickly exhaust my Groovy food. So I won't spend too much time dwelling on this, but you guys should be able to see some of the potential. We're going to go ahead and say touch, oh hi, Ruby, mate, okay. And I'm going to just create a little controller here. I'm going to say greeting controller, like so. And I'm going to go ahead and, by the way, how many of you are Ruby ninjas? Anybody here using Ruby? It's not for everybody, don't get me wrong, but it's certainly, I think it's a nice language. If you've looked at Apple's new Swift language, I think there's a lot of comparisons you can make there. There are some small mom-and-pop companies that have been using Ruby in production quite successfully. How many of you have heard Netflix? Netflix, anybody? Okay, so they're a huge Spring Boot and Groovy shop, for example. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about this. More than half of the projects at Netflix are going to be or already are Spring Boot and Groovy based, for example. So very, very, very humble users. Okay. Hello, world, right? So what is world? World is a string we're going to have available in our REST service. This is going to be a REST endpoint. I'm going to say @REST controller, like so. I'm going to say I'm going to return an object of some sort. We'll figure that later. Hello, path, variable, string, world. So this corresponds to an object. You know, I'm going to say whenever somebody goes to hi, whatever, that world is going to be extracted and made available as the value to this variable, which I'm going to pass into the Spring MVC controller. I'm going to create a little greeting here. I'm going to say greeting, like so. Okay, and that's about it. If you have a Mac, I'm going to be using Mac or Linux or something like that. Mac. Okay, that's not bad. If you have homebrew, you can just do brew install Spring Boot, and what you get is a Spring command line tool, very convenient. I know. Wonders never cease. Now, bear with me, we haven't even started. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to say Spring run, oh hi, Toronto. Did you see that, sir? The fellow who's amazed at our command line fruit. I want to point out something to you. We've got ASCII artwork. I know. I quiver just thinking about it too. So it's looked at the script. It's analyzed the components of the constituent component in the script, and it says, okay, well this is a Spring MVC controller. We need to give it Spring MVC and all the requisite libraries to support that. We probably want an embedded web server since it's a web application. And now I can go to here. You can say hi, Toronto. And I get this, JSON. Oh, thanks, boss. That's right. So I get a very basic endpoint path, right? That's the Groovy story. We're gonna, go into a little bit more in reality, and we'll show you the Java version. But you can see it's very easy to get started. Hopefully, you can see that. So close this, close that. Goodbye, goodbye. Bye to you.
They got riddles.
Yeah. Actually, I should mention that, for example, let's see. If you did this, like that. Pretty sure you could get it down to pi. Let me see here. I don't have the character count here, but somebody did this before. This is tweetable. That's an important distinction. When was the last time you could tweet a REST service,
The path variable.
Yeah. Ooh, I am. Yeah, there we go. Either way, not bad for horseshoes. So getting rid of that, let's actually do something real here. So back to my example here. I went to the start.spring.io. It gave me a zip file. I'm going to go to downloads, and then downloads is going to be a little starter zip file here. I'm going to go ahead and copy that to my desktop here. It's going to say hi, and I'm going to get rid of this, get rid of that, okay. Unzip. First things first. No magic up my sleeves, no rabbits, nothing. So I'm going to go in here, and you'll see I have a fairly humble directory structure. I have 4 files and lots of directories. So Maven build, okay, it's a basic Maven build. We've created what we call the Spring Boot starter dependencies. These Spring Boot starter dependencies are aggregate opinionated dependencies that provide what you need to work with this different style of workloads, right? So I clicked that web checkbox on the initializer, and I got a dependency here, Spring Boot starter web. Right? I clicked on the time leaf dependency, and I got the Spring Boot started time leaf. I clicked on JPA, and I got Spring Boot started data JPA. And of course, since we all want to unit test, we all unit test every day, right? Twice? Good? Right before bed? Good. That, of course, is here. There's no choice. You just have to have it. Unless you do this. Unless you get rid of it. But then you wouldn't have it, you know. But you do need it. It's good stuff. So we always include that. Our parent build here, this is sort of the same value proposition as that Spring IO platform bomb that we discussed earlier, except localized for Spring Boot style workloads. This is a opinionated, level set version of dependency management section for you. Right? It'll equalize all these versions for you for different style, different projects. That's why I don't have to specify the version for my web dependency or my data JPA dependency or anything like that. It just works. When I look at what this brings in for me, I get everything I need to be able to build a web application. If you think about how Spring normally works, normally it's okay. I want to use Spring BC's JDBC support or ORM support. Well, think about the ORM support in particular. Spring supports JDO. Does anybody here remember JDO? Yeah, me either. Does anybody here? So it supports Hibernate 3 and 4. It supports JPA 1 and 2. Right? It would be insane if your Maven build brought in 2 different versions of JPA, Hibernate, and JDO, all in the same platform. So everything in those dependencies, everything in those palms are optional because our users don't want that. We just need them to compile. That's how our code works, right? With these dependencies, however, you're getting a working stack for modern day workloads, right? So if I bring in Spring Boot start data JPA, I get Spring MVC, I get file support, I get form validation, I get REST support, I get JSON and XML marshalling, I get a full working set of libraries. Same thing for JPA. I'm going to get the new Hibernate. I'm going to get transaction support. I'm going to get Spring's ORM libraries. I'm getting everything I need to be able to make that work as well. So again, I've got 4 little dependencies here, but I'm getting a lot for my buck here. You don't have to spend time mucking around with the versions. We have some properties here. We're going to say that we want Java 1.8. How many of you using Java 1.8? Oh, guys, go home and change. I mean, it's so much better. I would offer to show you 1.7 examples. Spring Boot supports 1.6, 1.7, and 1.8, but I refuse to go backwards. I'm not gonna. I can't. I don't even know how anymore. My fingers don't work that way. It just doesn't. It just feels awful using 1.7 now. Now that you've gone 1.8, And then there's a plugin, and we'll look at this in a minute. So this plugin is entirely optional. Feel free to remove it if you don't want it, but as you'll see later, it can be quite handy. So with that out of the way, let's actually load up this editor, and we're going to build something, hopefully something awesome, mesmerize it. At the very least, something functional. Open. Desktop. Voila. Okay. Oh, I didn't give you the tour of the rest of the structure. So what you have here is source main resources, source main Java. You've got an empty application.properties file. Again, there's no magic there. You can do it if you want. There's an empty templates directory and an empty static directory. Again, you don't need it if you don't want it. And there's 2 classes. One is a fairly empty sort of starter unit test, right? Again, you don't have to use it. You can change everything about it, but it's just nice to have it written. And we have a public static void main with 3 annotations, right? So we have it. Even though I used that initializer and I used that wizard on the web, I got for my troubles 4 different Maven dependencies and 2 empty Java classes. You don't need that initializer to make this work. It's not. There's no requirement for that. I hope that's very clear. This is just. It saves you 5 minutes of time. It saved me 10 minutes of time because I'm slow. But you don't need this ever again. It's just code generation right here, and then you're done. And you don't even need that for the code generation. When you look at this class, this application class, what you see is a public static void main and the Spring application.run. Spring application.run is going to return your friend and mine, the application context, right? You don't need that application context. That's why we don't give you a variable, but there's no reason you couldn't, right? And I'm going to actually pass in the current class. I'm going to say, look at the current class and look around it and see what you can do for me. It's going to see the annotation at component scan. It's going to find all beans relative to this package or below that have at component, at controller, at repository, at service, etc., and bring them in and manage them for your Spring beans. It's going to see at configuration. And this says this is a Java configuration class. Okay? Spring Boot is Java configuration first. If you want to use XML, well, you can, but my Maven build was the last bit of XML I'm going to use tonight. So that's all we have, you know. And then this is the Spring Boot annotation. This is at-enable auto configuration. This says to Spring Boot, help, Mayday, you know, please. Like, this, I think, should have been more usefully renamed as, I want to go home, right, on time. And that's just basically it's the way of saying Spring Boot, do everything in your power to help me out. I have other things to do. I have a family, I have a life to lead. I have to go to the bathroom. I mean, there's just lots of other things that should be precedent to me working here and mucking around with configuration. Now, I'm going to go ahead and build a very simple application for you guys today, and we'll kind of walk through it. How many of you have heard of Open Table? It's like it's a nonsensically simple sort of a reservation banking system online. You can make reservations at restaurants. It's a dumb domain model. So dumb, in fact, that we can just kind of build something similar and not worry about the domain model at all. So we might, for example, imagine in a naive world that we might have a simple booking object. Okay, this is going to be a JPA entity, nothing special here. It's going to have an ID. It's going to have a booking name. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do something in the name of brevity that you should never do. Okay, I'm going to do something that is a complete no-no. Don't ever do this. Not even at home when you're alone. Don't ever do this. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and use public fields in the name of conciseness. Don't do it. I mean it. Just use constructors. Use getters. Do the right thing. Be object-oriented code for the win. Good. So these are properties on our JPA object. I'm going to go ahead and create a constructor here because I'm that kind of guy. Select none. I'm going to create a toString. So what I have here is a basic JPA entity with a toString. This is to make JPA happy, right? I need to know our constructor for JPA because it cares. And then I have my constructor because I'm lazy, because I want to just be able to instantiate the objects and get it over with. I need somewhere to talk to a database. I need someplace to store this. If I have an explicitly defined data source somewhere in my configuration, for example, it'll default to that. It'll defer to that data source, right? I can define my Oracle database or my SQL or Postgres or whatever. Your Java SQL data source. You can any bean you want. You can create a connection pool. You can look it up out of JNDI and do whatever you want. But absent an explicitly configured data source, Spring Boot will analyze the class path, and if you have something like H2, which is an embedded in-memory database on the class path, it'll automatically create a database for you. So this is about convention, right, over configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in H2, but it supports Derby and HSQL as well. So again, we're not, even for the demo, we're not trying to lock you in. This is just a demo database, okay?
The parent has a version.
Yep, of course, yep. So you guys want to see that? It's fun. Say yes. Go ahead and say yes. Yay! So here's the list of things that we've already stabilized and equalized for you. So Commons DBCP, Commons Pool, Crash Hub, Flyway, FreeMarker, Gemfire, Gradle, Groovy, H2, Amcrest, all the Hibernate nonsense. A few different connection pools, HTTP client, Hornet Queue, which is a great message queue from JBoss, HSQLDB, Jackson, Janino, JavaSys, Jetty, JodaTime, Mockito, MongoDB, Servlet API, Solar, Elasticsearch. Everything you could possibly, well, not possibly, but a lot of stuff, a lot of common tools. We've already kind of found a working set and we've normalized them for you. So you don't have to use this. This is just maybe. Of course, you can, ratchet it up and down as because your use case. But if by default, if you're trying to get started, this isn't bad. So close the elements here. So I have an embedded data source that's been created for me. I'm going to create a repository so I can talk to that data source. How many of you have heard of Spring Data? Spring Data is an umbrella project. Anybody? Awkward. Spring Data is an umbrella project that provides the ability to talk to a lot of different sort of advanced data stores, including SQL data stores. Right? So we provide something called a repository. A repository is inspired very much from Ruby on Rails. How many of you have had how many of you have used Ruby on Rails? Or known somebody who accidentally knew somebody who maybe tripped and fell and hit somebody who knew Ruby on Rails? Anybody? Yeah. It's a thing. Nothing wrong with that. It's a very interesting thing, actually. I think there's a lot of good things we can learn from that community, and we have, at least we're trying to. One thing they have in that community is something called active record. Right? So you can say class car active record in, and then you have that's a class definition for car. And you can say car, car equals car.new, car, or you can do car.make and mode, and it's going to be whatever. And what you have here is a bunch of cars that are going to be discovered for you by this method. This method, as you can see, I don't actually have a method. It's a method that doesn't exist. And in Java, this would be a non-starter. You have to have a method in order to call it. It's a compiler after all. You can't quite get away with this nonsense in Java. But in Ruby and Rails code, method not existing is just that. It's just one thing. It can be tried and caught as an exception. And you can actually track the exception, introspect it, and kind of reverse engineer a query from it. So this query might be select all from cars or make equal under model equals civic, for example. So it's convention over configuration. We can't quite get away with that kind of stuff in Java, but we can sure come close. So check this out. JPI repository, booking, long, etc. So that's an interface that Spring Data is going to see. And it's going to see that it extends this base type, JPA repository. And it's going to see that this interface has methods for like finding all of a given type, for finding some of a given type, for saving many, for saving and flushing many, for deleting and for finding one. It's going to have methods for finding all and so on, for CRUD style stuff as well. Let's go back here. And there are similar analogous interfaces for MongoDB, for Cassandra, for Gemfire, for Elasticsearch, for Solr, for anything you can likely want to use. This is not about one API to rule them all. This is about helping you extract the boilerplate tedious code that you could probably imagine if you close your eyes and let the machine do it. Right? Queries are something that tends to sort of be boring, and repository code in particular, data access object. This is boring stuff. In Ruby on Rails, you saw I added a dynamic finder based on the method there. You can do the same thing here. You can say booking, okay, find by booking name, right? And I can say string bn like that. So what I have there is a method that by default will be something like select all from booking where booking underscore name equals that, right? That's going to be generated by default. Of course, I'm more than free to override it and do whatever I want. Pass in an actual query there. Select all from my booking, whatever, right? Whatever you want. You can override all of these, and you can use a MongoDB query if you wanted. You can use a Gemfire OQL statement. You can do whatever you want as befits the data source you're talking to. So, not bad. So let's go ahead and use this. Let me go ahead and create a bean here. How many of you played with Java configuration? Okay, so Java configuration is a way of defining beans in Java, just like that. It turns out that that Java, for all its faults, is pretty good at creating Java objects. I mean, there are other things it's not so good at, but creating Java objects in Java is actually pretty easy. It's one of those things that it does well. And that's why in 2005 we introduced the Java Config project, okay, the Java configuration project. This project is was a separate project that sat adjacent to the core Spring framework that provides support for what I just said, configuring Java objects in Java. And the way it works is you create a bean. In this case, I'm going to create a bean of type command line runner. And I'm going to say, init. And the return value of all these annotation methods, all these methods that have @bean on it, the return value is going to be stored in the context, made available for injection. It's going to have all the joins and stuff applied to it. It has all the same services applied to it that any bean as defined in XML would have applied to it. Okay? But the nice thing is you can take advantage of all of Java's intrinsic beauty, including things like for loops and if statements and so on, right? So you get factory methods, if you will. I'm going to use this is an interface in Spring Boot. You can think of it as like a initializing bean ++, right? So initializing bean is a callback that will get notified when the context has satisfied all the dependencies on the bean that you're trying to configure. So if you implement a bean, if you create a bean and that bean implements initializing bean, you'll get a callback notification when all the dependencies for that bean have been satisfied. In this case, command line runner is going to get a callback with the public static void main string arguments once the application is initialized. So this is a good place to put application-wide initialization as we're going to do here. So I'm going to say return new command line runner, right, like that. And I can hear you saying already, well, Josh, You just said you're a big fan of Java 1.8. What the hey, man? What the hey? This is a perfect candidate for Lambda, and indeed, you're right. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all this nonsense. I'm going to just change it to be args, like that. Okay? Java configuration can take advantage of all the same things you expect from any kind of configuration in Spring, including dependency injection and so on. So I'm going to say, I want a reference to this booking repository here. Okay? So I'm asking Spring to find the fully configured implementation of the booking repository that Spring Data has synthesized for me, and to make it available so I can use it in my logic here, my beans logic. And of course, if I were configuring a bean with setters, I could actually just pass that in as the setter. I could say foo.set booking repository and then pass in that argument there. Okay. But in this case, all I want to do is do some initialization logic. So this is as good a thing as any. Let's see. Arrays as list. Actually, log here. Keep it simple. Oh boy. Names? Somebody? Help. I'm out of names already. What?
Kevin, that's my name.
What is it?
Kevin.
Kevin. Hi, Kevin. Welcome. So I've got an array of values there. I'm going to go for each. And I'm going to say name like this. This is a Java 8-ism. It's just a for each loop. If you've done any kind of programming at all ever in the last 20 years, you've probably seen this. To my utter and complete and nauseating embarrassment and chagrin, even C++, a language whose governing body meets but once every 5 years, has lambdas already. So I'm really happy that these finally made it into Java. And so that's what I'm doing here. So forgive me if I don't feel any hesitation in using them. So I'm going to say for each name in that list, booking repository.save, new booking. I'm going to pass in the name. That's the name of the game after all. So they did that. Pass that in. Go down. And I'm going to say booking.repository find all.forEach system.out.line like so. And what you get there is you can see I've just created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 records. I've saved them into the database. And then I've got a booking repository that I'm using to actually query for all the records. I'm going to go ahead and run this public static void main after all. Any questions while this is running? I can understand if you've got them. I mean, I have them. I'm here. I was paying attention. And I still have questions. What does it all mean? Why are we here? We're out of time. Sorry, guys. It already started. So that's fine. You can see when I printed out the application that the records are there, right? Went to the database, came back, they have a primary key, I can work with it. Obviously, if I had relationships and all that, that would be respected as well. So already, not bad at all, but we can do better, and we shall. So I've heard it said, and I'm sure you might have as well, that an application of sufficient complexity eventually sends email. Now, in today's world, in the world of the cloud in 2014, I would posit an application of sufficient complexity eventually sprouts a REST API. So we're going to do that. And we're going to say REST controller. This is Spring MVC now. We were just playing with Spring Data and the JD support and JPA support. But now we're going to use Spring MVC. So I'm going to say booking REST controller. Okay, and I'm going to say I want to create an endpoint here that returns all the bookings, from the database. So I'm going to say bookings, and I'm going to go ahead and inject my booking repository as before. So I'm saying Spring, give me a fully initialized reference to that bean, and I'm going to map this endpoint to /bookings like so. Okay. And I'm going to say this.booking.repository.find all. And I'm going to reformat the code to find out. Hit go. And good old ASCII artwork. I think that's impressive. I want to point out, by the way, that the people that work on Spring Boot, these are really, really smart people. In fact, one of them has a PhD. One of them is a doctor, for Pete's sake. And I would just like you to know that this is a bald doctor. This is a man who's had a very hard life and has had to use his considerable brain power to solve some incredibly hard problems. This is why he's bald. So to think that at one point he had a ticket that basically said, we need to ask you over, man. That's what we did to this guy, for you, the hipsters. So, moving on. Start the application up. Localhost bookings. Okay. I've got my JSON beta. I've got my JSON, REST service back. Not bad. Pretty quick. I will point out that actually I've just written a lot of code for absolutely no reason at all, I'm going to go ahead and delete this code. That's how I roll. I'm going to go ahead and go down here and say rest. I'm going to go ahead and actually add a dependency to my POM first. I'm going to say dependency Spring Boot starter remote. Spring Boot starter data rest. Right. This is going to bring in Spring data rest. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So that's a Spring data rest project. Once that's on the class path, I can go back to my code over here, annotate my repository with rest resource. I'm going to go ahead and restart. Wait for it. Okay. And now if I go back here, I get a much smarter REST service that's just done for me based on the repository itself. Okay. If you had a one-to-one relationship or one-to-one relationship in your database, that would be honored. You would be able to see that as well. What you're seeing here are all the records in the database, which is probably not something you want in production, but it's darn convenient. You can exclude that. You can disqualify it. And you have hypermedia, HotOS. Have you guys heard of HotOS? Hypertext as the engine of application state. It's this idea that the client should have everything it needs to be able to manipulate the state of a resource in the representation of that resource alone, including an idea of where to go and what to do with that resource from there. Right? So you shouldn't have to reconnect to the server to figure this out. This is like the game Bork. Do you guys remember Bork from the 80s? It's like a choose your own adventure. You go to / and you get a link telling you what's possible from here. In this case, we have bookings. And if I go to bookings, you can see I've got a kind of like a self-description right here. It says I've got one link called bookings that is at this URI, and this URI is templated, so I know that I can substitute certain parameters. I can say bookings page equals 1 and size equals 2, right? And what I get now are just those two records and links for the next and for the previous ones, right? So this is Spring Data REST. I don't know if this is something that you will care about, but I think it's pretty awesome. Yes, no, so far, maybe a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. I should also mention that the search endpoint is here, right? So that finder method is already exposed for you as well. I happen to know that this particular one won't work because my interface isn't public. I have it in the package protected scope. Don't know why, but if I did have it public and then that's it, we can do that if you want. Command 1, booking repository, like so. Okay, go back there, public. And I have to do one more thing. I have to tell Spring the name of the parameter, since it can't infer the name from the interface at runtime. Java doesn't retain the name of the interface parameters at runtime. It does it for classes, but not for interfaces. So I'm going to say booking name. Okay, like that. Get rid of this nonsense. Goodbye. Restart. I'll be the first to admit that this particular endpoint isn't particularly RESTful. Find by booking name is not a very RESTful endpoint, but it can sure be helpful if you're trying to drive, master detail grids or finder pages or whatever, some sort of back office thing. That's up and running. Go to search again, and I'm going to go here, and I need to actually pass in booking name. Like so, equals right, there comes the record back. And you can do the same thing as before, you get paging and all that stuff. So that's Spring Data REST. Any example? Oh, that's because I passed in the curly bracket at the beginning, right? That's the exception. Okay, so that's a RESTful endpoint. Not bad, but we can do better. What demo would be complete without some sort of HTML sort of story, So we're going to go ahead and build a regular controller. Do you guys remember regular controllers before REST? The things we used to do with REST before everything was a JSON endpoint? Anybody? Awkward. Neither. Okay, good. So moving on. Controller, class, booking, MVC controller. Okay, and I'm going to create a controller method that says I'm going to handle all the bookings. Like so, I'm going to pass in a model, which is basically a Spring MVC context. It's a map. It's a glorified map in which you can stuff attributes that will be referenceable from inside of a template. Be that template a JSP page, a flea market template, or a velocity template, or a JSP template. Don't use JSP. Please don't. How many of you guys are using JSP? I'm just curious. Do you know that every time you do that, an angel falls from the sky with a burned, singed moon? hits the ground, screams, and then dies of cancer. Every time. Every time. It's really bad. I can find things on the street that are better for rendering information on the server than JSP. Don't use it. Don't use it. Okay, so request mapping. Foo.html, okay, or bookings.html, or bookings.php, whatever, bookings.js. It doesn't matter. Right? This is just entirely sort of how I want to map this endpoint to my web server. And then I'm going to inject my booking repository, just as before, make that work. Voila. And I'm going to say model.addAttributes bookings this.booking repository.find all. Voila. Okay. And then I'm going to return a string which is going to be plugged into what's called a view solver. A view solver is a sort of a standard string MVC. It's a heuristic that is used to determine which template should be rendered given this string. So this is going to be, source main Java resources templates plus x plus .html. Right? That's what's going to happen by default, depending on which types you have in the class path. So in our case, remember, you see I had the Spring Boot starter timely on the class path. That's all configured support for rendering and working with timely templates. So I don't have to do much more than that, except for actually defining my template. By default, like I said, based on convention, it's going to look for it in the templates folder, which I guess, if we're honest, it makes sense, right? GitHub.com, put 8 examples. REST MVC. Source main. I'm cheating here because I want to spare you guys all the tedious HTML5 sexiness. There we are. So this is a HTML5 page. This is a timely template, but it's also HTML5 friendly. You know that thing where you take like a JSP page and you give it to your designer and he gives you the finger? Because it's got all these tags that don't render or Dreamweaver at all. There's no element that they ever will, ever, not even a million years. Now you can round trip, right? Timeleaf is very good for round tripping. It's HTML5 friendly. You can open this up in a browser. It uses namespaces like this, and you can see each element here. For example, it's like Angular.js. The div element here has a th for each attribute. I'm going to say for each booking in the bookings attribute in the model, render this, nested piece, and then, print out the ID and the booking name. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and run this again. This time it's going to start. So, whilst I'm doing this, have you guys noticed that I haven't been deploying to a Tomcat? That's nice. I think that's a good thing. So there's our REST endpoint just as before. Not a big deal. I can go back to bookings.html now, and I get the printed out HTML render view of this, Of course, all the other stuff works, right? So, sorry? It is an embedded container. It's using embedded Tomcat 7. You can switch that out to Tomcat 8 if you want, or Jetty 9 and 8. Right, so Jetty 9 and Tomcat 8 are the leading edge, not GA stuff, not GA bits. So they're not used by default. You simply exclude Tomcat from the class path and replace it with our Spring Boot starter Jetty. And you get that. Or you could just, I'll show you in a minute how to actually just create a standard servlet-free application that you can deploy to a more classic application server. How many of you guys are, and I'm serious as a heart attack here, guys. I'm here for you. We're among friends. There's no shame. How many of you guys are using WebSphere? I give away hugs. Open source hugs. I'm here for you. WebLogic, in a minute? Oh, okay, good. There are people you can see this. It's okay. It's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, like cancer is, markedly worse. But yeah. You can deploy these applications to those kinds of servers if you like. In fact, and you can of course deploy them since they are Spring and they work in any environment to things like a Raspberry Pi or to a cloud or a platform as a service, right? And to prove that point, I even did a root applications. Okay, and a blog, and this blog is ancient, creakingly ancient from back in March. It shows how to talk to embedded, how to use the embedded options like Jetty and Tomcat, and then how to do a sort of a classic application server scenario like a JBoss or a WebSphere or whatever. and and then how to take it to a cloud. For example, here's Cloud Foundry, and then also to Heroku, right? So the same app can live anywhere you want it to be, Okay, so that is a good first cut of our application, but we can do better. I love this book there's a book by a gentleman named Michael Nygaard. It's called Release It. Have you guys read this? It's epic. It's really good, and it's funny, and it's really good. The punchline is feature complete does not equal production ready. Okay, the last mile between the last ticket and production is very large, and if you don't plan for that up front, you're going to face trouble. And we believe that as well. We are very we are very interested in making sure that getting to production is as easy as possible. This dovetails very nicely with another new trend called microservices. Have you guys heard about microservices? This idea, okay, good. Microservices basically says that it's basically solid, the solid object-oriented design principles for the architecture, right? It's basic ideas like DRY, do not repeat yourself. It's basic ideas of the single responsibility principle, applied to the service tiers. And there's a lot of ways to kind of grapple with it. I've heard a couple of nice, interesting taglines, One is solo, but without the solo, right? REST instead, obviously. There's a guy named Fred George. He's a gentleman out of the UK, and he talks about microservices, and he talks about his team's struggle to find the right size for a service. I mean, the idea is to build as small a service as possible, build the simplest thing that could possibly work. And Fred George and his team struggled with this question. They said, well, what is the right size? What's the right number? Anecdotally, of course, this is just sort of an arbitrary line in the sand, but he said it's about 100 lines of code. 100 lines of code, and it's kind of an interesting number if you think about it. It's really, really small, although, to be fair, I haven't quite got there yet. It's this JPNs that gets in the way. But anyway, it's a very interesting sort of distinction. It's a number that, if you think about it, doesn't intimidate you. Nobody ever sweats about having to write 100 lines of code. If you're a consultant, you're going to pay. You guys get paid by the line of code, right? Microservices are bad news for you guys. But if you're not a consultant, you're going to go home in time. Microservices are a good deal. There are other benefits to it, not the least of which is that if you build a microservice and you want to scale it out according to the requirements for that service, it's very easy to do so because you're not co-located with all those other concepts, right? Just one service, one data store, one bit of functionality, as discrete and small as possible. You compose this at a higher tier, like the client, for example, but really you're just exposing services, right? Little bits of services, and of course these services have to be worth the effort. You don't want to expose, math.power as a microservice. That'd be useless, But something where it's worth having that quality of service dimension, worth having that manageability dimension, right? 100 lines of code is pretty cool because if you think about it, what if there's a bug in somebody's 100 lines of code? What if it's written in what if it's written in some obscene, horrible binaries like Perl, or what if it's in Node.js or Rails or something, and that guy is since left, he's off to go write a new cat picture website or something like that. There's nobody on the team who knows Node.js. Who cares? It's 100 lines of code. Throw it away and rewrite it in Java. You can do it in the afternoon. 100 lines is really nice. Obviously, it's an arbitrary line in the sand, but it's an interesting idea. It's this idea that your services can be scaled out as they need to, that they can be small enough that anybody can work with them and rock them. But this has some implications. It means that if you want to be able to manage these services and scale them and integrate them into your larger platform, you need to have scripting on the edges to make this seamless, right? You need to be able to stick it into your security frameworks, into monitoring frameworks. You need to be able to see what's happening in a consistent way across all the languages. Well, of course, from our perspective, we think the platform as a service is a very natural story here. Not everybody thinks that, but I think it's an interesting way to look at this problem. It's an interesting way to handle a lot of things like routing and scaling out, right? If you have a service that's, do you guys remember Slashdot? That reference is becoming increasingly opaque to people, which is kind of troubling because I still see, when I see Bill Gates, I still think of the Borg, But anyway, there used to be this thing called the Slashdot effect, which is that if your site was on Slashdot, you're going to be knocked over, If your site was on Slashdot, they're going to deluge you with so much traffic that you wouldn't be able to stay online. And now, it's since renamed like being digged, you know, or Oprah or whatever, right? There's a similar effects that have come since then. But the idea is still the same. If you need to scale out quickly, you can't go to the data center and stand up in the servers, you know. The cloud is the most natural way to go. I don't think I have to tell you guys that. So that's certainly one aspect to it. In order to keep yourself below this 100 lines of code, it has to be easy. It has to be easy to be able to kind of plug into this cloud. It has to be easy to plug in common things like security and monitoring. And Spring Boot is optimized for that as well. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our little application here and sort of, you know, optimize for production. Okay. So I've got this application. Oh boy, guys, look at all those extra wasted lines. Oh, that's better. 79 lines of code so far, and I do feel bad about it, but sometimes you can't help it. Okay, first things first, I'm going to go ahead and import another one of those checkboxes. Remember on that website, start.spring.io, we had the actuator checkbox, which is a very weird name. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, org.springframework.boot, spring boot, starter, no, actuator. Okay, so the actuator, as I understand my lowly brain, as I've been told, it describes in physics something that takes a little bit of energy and makes a lot out of it. You know, like the physics equivalent of the Bruce Lee 1-inch punch. This is a good thing, right? In production, you want all the stuff to come for free, especially when it comes to things like visibility into your application. So this sets up a lot of that stuff. I'm going to go ahead and restart the application now, having done my fair share of coding. God, I love that ASCII artwork. Look at that. And you know, there could be bugs in it. Stop. There could be bugs in this ASCII artwork. You don't know. You know? How do you even unit test that? I'm just saying. By the way, I actually got asked at one of these talks whether that's changeable. And that wasn't changeable. And you could disable it, but you couldn't change it. And some guy got pissed. So now in 1.1, since we aimed at these, you can provide your own ASCII artwork, but I would challenge you to do a better job than we have here. I don't think you can. I'm just saying. I'm just putting that out there. You probably can't. We had a PhD do this. So, bookings. Good stuff. Bookings, HTML, bookings /1, /2, refresh a few times, 4, okay? So I've made some requests into my application, and now I can ask questions like, hey, how many requests have I made into my application? I can go to /metrics. This gives me a JSON dump of the state of the application right now. I can say, oh, well, somebody went to hi. So somebody went to /bookings 4 different times. There's a status code response of 200. Somebody went to bookings /1 and 2 one time with status code 200 response. That means it's A-OK, everything's all right. You know, you can see the results here. Right? You can see how many requests have been made. You can see how much memory you've got, how many processors you've got on the computer, the uptime, how much heat, how many threads, how many classes, etc. Interesting stuff to have available. You can see the configured beams in the application context, right? As you might imagine, Spring is beaming a lot of stuff up for you, right? Spring can beam really well. You shouldn't have to. We beam so that you don't have to. And these beams are what we've been beaming for you, right? So look at all these. These are the controllers and the entities that you've got and the bits that we do behind the scenes. You can kind of see the dependencies and how this all ties together. This is actually something. This is a very natural thing to want to plug into like a graph database to see all the interconnected dependencies in an application. Neo4j, just recommending it, just putting that out there. So that's cool. You can go to health, right? Health is an endpoint that tells you the state of the application right now. Tie this into your Nagios or to your Hyperion or to your New Relic, whatever. You know, you can plug it into a heartbeat system. And you know, we have different health endpoints depending on which the class path. For example, in this case, we're just using JPA, so this tells me the current JPA entity, you know, the entity manager dialect that we're using, which is H2. It tells me the status, which is, actually, it should be pretty apparent, it's up. And it tells me the results of the validation query that's being used on our connection pool. By default, we set up a Tomcat database connection pool. The Tomcat database connection pool has been shown to be provably faster than the Apache Commons DBCP connection pool. But if you don't have Tomcat fast path, it'll default to the Commons DBCP one. right? So if you can just provide an Oracle data source, but don't provide a connection pool, we'll wrap it for you and provide a connection pool. And we'll provide a useful validation query. In this case, it's select one from, it's just select one, but from Oracle it'll be like select one from Dual or whatever, okay? Let's see, what else? We did env. Env gives you kind of an enumeration of your application, of the environment in which the application is running. Here's all the properties, everything that's happening, the path, the system that get env bits, current user, the system environment, all this good stuff, right? What else do I want? Oh, there are properties that you can set to override parts of the machinery, okay? These property values are going to be consulted when Spring starts up. By default, we're going to look at application.properties. But you can use these to override how things are working. So for example, if you want Spring to create the data source for you, and you just want to plug in a URL and a username and password, you should provide a property called spring.datasource.url, or spring.datasource.username, or spring.datasource.password. Or you can create your own data source bean, in which case all this is moot. But again, we're trying to make it so that you can gradient into more work or less work. If you want to just provide a few properties in a property file, this is fine. You might be looking at this application and thinking, well, gosh, gee willikers, darn, I don't want that beans endpoint in production. That's probably not very secure. Fair point. So, you can disable it. You do so by going to endpoints.beans.enable and say false. Okay, so I'm going to do just that. I'm going to go to my application.properties. I'm going to say false. I'm also going to change the port on which this application is running. I'm going to say server.port, 9000. Right? No big deal. Reload.
Is that just for the health and everything that you're running on 9000?
No, everything's on that. I told Tom you have to listen here. Listen here, you.
Is there a way to have the metrics on one port?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is one way to go. Obviously, I've linked to 9000 here. The beans endpoint is no longer there, right? I've dismantled that for you. You're welcome. Everything else is still here, of course, right? Health, etc. Indeed, you can even change parts of the machinery. Like I said earlier, you can override by providing bean definitions. If you don't want to consult those properties, you can. So, for example, let's suppose I want to override my health indicator, So I can say, I'm going to create a bean of type health indicator. So I'm going to return a status. Oops, this is I'm going to have to provide an implementation of health indicator. Health indicator is a functional interface in Java 8. It has one job, to return an object of type health. So the lambda expression is as thus. And reload. So health now shows, the results of my override there, right? I can plug in everything. I can plug in the metrics. I can provide my own metrics. There's a very nice library by a guy named Cody Hale. He's an awesome engineer from Yammer. Yammer's like enterprise Twitter. It's private Twitter. Naturally a lot of scale, but not really Twitter scale. But still pretty interesting. And he had to, he wanted more visibility to what the application was doing into production. So he built a whole bunch of adapters for various visualization and monitoring tools. For example, Graphite. Graphite is a nice way to visualize data over time. You can override all these things as you like, but anything that Graphite can speak to, you can plug in and use from here as well. I'm sorry, anything that Cody Hale and his metrics library you can see from here as well, because you can use the Cody Hale metrics library from Spring Boot. Right? So anything that we don't support out of the box, you can already use from his library, right? We've adapted it to ours. So, for example, you could plug into Graphite. There's a small mom-and-pop company out of LA called Ticketmaster that's using Spring Boot for their service-based platform, and they've overridden their Graphite. They're not using Graphite because they get too much scale, so it would knock it over. So instead, they're using this thing called the OpenTSDB, which is an open time series database. It's good for watching, the flow of traffic over time against the production system. That's an example for example. you can override all these pieces automatically, right? And this, of course, this is not the only place to see this information. If I go back to my application, maybe having it on rest isn't your cup of tea, that's fine. Go down here, grab one of these other dependencies, extend it to be Spring Boot Starter Actuator. Oops, no, I'm sorry, Spring Boot Starter Remote Shell. Voila. Okay, gonna restart. Go, go, go. Look at that ASCII over. So the application's back up and running. Thank you. I haven't tied this into Spring Security. It's dead simple to do so, but Spring Security is our security framework. I don't know, have you guys heard of Spring Security? Okay. It's easily the #1 most popular security framework in the JVM space. Owing in large part, I think, to the fact that they made such a dog's breakfast of security in the enterprise world that anything would have been okay. But it's also a very nicely done framework, so it actually has lots of integrations with things like Active Directory, PAM, Cavaros, LDAP, OAuth, whatever. Anything you can think of, the SiteMinder, anything you can think of wanting to talk to and use for identity provider, there's probably a Spring Security binding. I'm not going to go ahead and set that up right now because time, but since I haven't, Spring Boot is giving me a default username and password. Okay, and that is printed in here on the shell. Go to the console here, and I can say SSH -P to the 2000 user at 127.0.0.1. Paste. And then I get the ASCII alert. It's a welcoming sign. It's like a welcome mat that says, "Hi, awesome." You can say, you can ask the shell, you're in an SSH session after all. You can say, "Give me some help. What's up?" I can ask questions like, "Oh, beans. Give me my beans." Ask help again. Metrics, right? Those metrics that I showed you before, they're all available inside this SSH secured shell. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, good. I can say system.props gives me the environments as well, for example. I even have some other stuff that you don't get from our REST. So you can say JVM, GC, right? I can say Java type, Java.string. Get the reverse compiled nature of that object, the protection information. My favorite view ever, the one that makes me happy when I wake up in the morning, puts a little bit of a spring in my step. I know, I'm funny. Okay, dashboard. This is Java top, basically. It shows you all the processes running in your Java application. It shows you the memory. Rendering awkwardness. It's always weird when you do this on the screen and just projector, but it usually fits much nicer. It shows you all the running Java processes, it shows you the environments, and it shows you memory. In this case, I'm using Java 8. In Java 8, they permgen went the way of the dodo, and they replaced it with something called the metaspace. Metaspace is garbage collectible references to things like classes and so on. But this would work in Java 6 and Java 7 just as well, and you get information about the permgen, right? There's a lot of stuff you can get out of this. This is not the only way to work with this, of course. How many of you use JMX? That's a fairly common way of managing system, right? So JConsole here. And go ahead and start that up. Here, demo an application, project, insecure, sure, you're insecure. Let's see. Go to the endpoints here. Go to metrics, go to operations, get the data. There's the same kind of information as we had before. I can go to the health endpoint, etc. Data. There's my, I know Toronto, etc. So anything you can, there's other places you can put this data, but the point is we're trying to make it as simple as possible to get that job done. Let's see. I think we've covered a lot here. Some of you might be wondering just how the heck is this all working? It seems a little bit like witchcraft and sorcery and black magic. And to be fair, I can understand that complaint. This is actually just very, very simple Spring 4 goodness. Like I said, we've just had these lazy engineers on the Spring project. We just had them write the code for you finally. We couldn't just leave you to do that last mile. We had to get them to do it. So what we're going to show you guys now is what this Mayday annotation is giving you, what it's doing exactly. Okay? Behind the scenes, when Spring Boot starts up, it's fine to enable auto configuration. It's going to look for something called Spring.factories. Spring.factories is a file that any jar, whether it's yours or ours or anybody's, can have. We have one right here, Spring Boot Actuator, for example, and Spring Boot Auto Configure. You can see we've got a few different sections here, but the one that's really nice is Auto Configure. So you say Oral Spring Framework Boot Auto Configure .enable Auto Configuration. Kind of a mouthful. Equals, and then there's a common delimited list of classes that you can use, that do configuration for various common projects and use cases, right? So you can see counted among these references here, auto configuration for our AOP support, for RabbitMQ, for Spring Batch, for Elasticsearch, for JPA, for MongoDB, for Solar, for basic REST support, and Spring Data REST, which is what we saw earlier. For FreeMarker and Hypermedia, for Spring integration, all the basic JDBC bits, including the connection pools and all that stuff. JMS, JMX, HornetQ, and ActiveMQ specific JMS integrations. Elasticsearch, Flyway, which is a database migration tool. It gives you the ability to say, here's my schema for version 1, and here's my version schema for version 1.1, and it'll create the delta and let you update, run the updates against your data set. Liquibase, same thing. Flybase and Liquibase are very much the same thing. Groovy server pages, right? This is the server pages template thing that comes from the Rails framework. Spring Mobile, which makes it very simple to react to mobile accesses against your web application. Mongo repositories and Mongo GridFS support. Hibernate, our Reactor project. Redis, Spring Security, Spring Social, and Spring Social Facebook, and Spring Social LinkedIn, and Spring Social Twitter. Solar integration, right? Timeleaf, we have a whole slew of stuff for web processing, video file uploaders, and all this stuff, right? So I know what you're thinking. Why on earth would I want all this stuff in my Kafka? What the heck am I hoping to achieve here? Let's take a look at one of these classes, okay? So this is the Rabbit auto configuration. Not this one. This is the Rabbit auto configuration. It's a Java class, like we've been doing so far, just Java code. It's annotated with @configuration. And this is a Spring Bean annotation. Spring annotation that says to Spring, hey, this class contains bean definitions. When Spring sees this class, it should attempt to instantiate and run and manage the beans that are defined inside of it. But we don't want this to go ahead and get started when the application starts. If, for example, as is the case in this case, we don't have RabbitMQ in the class path. So in Spring 4, we introduced something called @conditional. @conditional is an annotation that takes as its one argument a class literal, which points to a type condition. Okay, it's a bit of a mouthful, but basically this is an if-then test for your beans. Okay, and the condition, there's lots of conditions. Spring Boot builds on this heavily, so we actually have several different types of conditional annotations that are meta-annotated with conditional, which then specifies these class conditions. Okay, so for example, we have conditional on web application, conditional on conditional on a class being present on the class path, conditional on there being no other bean of this type in the context. Remember earlier when I told you that you could create a data source and the default data source that Spring would go away? That's because it's checking to make sure there are no other beans in the context of the type Java is equal to the data source. It's doing so, like we are here. I'm saying when Spring starts up, try and run this configuration class, but only if the Rabbit template and channel classes are on the class path. You can see here that I've got like blood in my code, right? Class not found, and this is actually going to use bytecode analysis at startup to check the type to make sure that the type is present. So we don't do a class.core name and then bail out. It's nothing so ugly. It's very, very efficient. So it short circuits the evaluation of everything inside. So this stuff never sees the light of day if these initial guards don't work. So in this way, we can make sure that the configuration is exactly what you want it to be. By having it on the class path, you're making a statement. You're saying, I want this in my application. And we can do things like, okay, well, I want to define an AMQP admin instance, but only if there's no other property. Only if there's no property in the message source, in some property file somewhere of type spring.RabbitMQ.dynamic that equals false. See what I'm saying? So if somebody says spring.RabbitMQ.dynamic equals false, this bean won't get created. That's why these properties that I've been showing you our consultant. That's why they're honored. That's why they get used. Okay. We can default to providing you something, but only if you say that's okay. Only if you don't opt out of it. And we do this in a lot of different places. Okay. So the result is that when you run Spring Boot, it'll try and do everything for you, but of course it won't do it if it can't. And the best part about this is that you can do this for your own organization projects. This is what I mean about keeping it below that 100 lines of code. If you're building services in your architecture, in your organization, and these services need common security, they need to talk to the same back-end identity provider, they need to have the same kind of, for example, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance rules in the States are particularly burdensome. There's something that you want to get right in one place and then spread throughout all the projects in a service template style, right? The Sarbanes-Oxley, by the way, refers to the requirement of an organization to be able to track and prove the flow of cash in a publicly traded financial application. Right? If you're an application that deals with money and you're publicly traded, you need to be able to prove and demonstrate the flow of money through that system. You have to have auditing. You have to have trackability. This is an ideal place to put that. Get it right once, put it in a jar, add a Spring.Factories file, and then make sure all your projects use it. They don't have to configure anything. It just gets auto-configured for them. Right? So it doesn't have to be cool stuff like Flyway and Liquibase. It could be the more mundane stuff as well. But either way, it helps you give your projects a level of consistency. Okay? And of course, there are other integrations that aren't even here. For example, I work on the activity workflow engine. It's a BPMN2 workflow engine. We have an auto configuration as part of that project. Vaadin is a UI framework. It's a WIT-based UI framework. There's an auto configuration that makes setting up Vaadin with that on the class path. Then you can Vaadin directly. You know, it's easier to use activity with boot than it is to use it directly. Boot simplifies the experience. Okay, I think we're nearing our allotment. I want some water, so I'm going to stop. You guys have any questions, thoughts, feedback, tomatoes? Where do you even get the tomatoes? Where does that come from? Who brings tomatoes to a tech talk?
I do have a question. So,
yes, sir.
The Rabbit kind of like that class and class, they're not. That all of this configuration is in the Spring Boot framework, or is it in?
This is in one jar of the Spring Boot framework.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we don't have. But we wrote the code with everything on our class path. We don't have it on yours,
yes,
right?
Okay.
And so we don't want this to fail. So we have jars. These are runtime if def kind of statements. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah, sir.
It's the magic behind that entity class in region. You define a find by function.
Yep.
What's the magic behind it?
Spring data and convention. So Spring data will see the auto configuration that turns on Spring data is set up to look in the same component, the context path, the same packet path. It's going to find all the interfaces that extend one of these well-known base interfaces from Spring data, and it'll synthesize an implementation based on the name of the method. So if I say find by booking name, it'll create a query, select all from booking where booking name equals, and then the first parameter. If I have an account with multiple orders, 1 to n, I can say find by, I can say find order by account name, for example. It'll traverse the ones, it'll traverse the relationship to do the JPA query for me. Yes, that's the ID. That's the ID, or the key, or whatever the appropriate thing is for that in JPA. That's the primary key. Yeah, that's the ID. Yes.
Is the code gen or is it reflection?
It's cdeliv code gen when it starts up, when the application starts up. So it's cdeliv. It's going to be a class at runtime. It goes into the heap, into metaspace. It's blazing fast, but it does get generated when you start the application. So it's runtime code gen. It's not a proxy, that's what I'm going to say. Other questions? You must have some. Oh, of course. Yes, sir.
Auto configuration, this is as much a Spring question as a Boot question. So some microservices that we're working will have to come up really quickly.
Good.
Is it premature optimization to worry about auto configuration, or do you think it's wrong? Like, does it come up quick?
I did it because I did it with
You don't have a lot of stuff in your class.
What?
You don't have a lot of classes in your class.
That's because they're microservices. If they were fat services, they'd be different.
It'll take longer.
By the by, I do want to show you, speaking of fat, they have one last trick of our sleeve here. Go to the desktop here. Go to Oh Hi. Maven Clean Install. Remember that build plugin I mentioned, ominously for everything in this talk? That build plugin provides one last nice feature. Running the unit test, bear with me here. There's nothing in it, of course. Go to the target directory and you see two different jars here, right? The original one is the original, it's the jar, it's a zip file with the meta directory and the basic meta manifest.mf and my one or two classes that I've written here, my 5 classes plus my code pages. The other one here is about 35 megs, okay? And of course that is your Spring Boot application. It includes everything. It includes Tomcat, it includes all of Hibernate, it includes all of the Spring libraries, including Spring Data, Spring MVC, the REST support, transaction support. It includes the remote shell, the SSH shell I showed you, it includes the JMX integrations. That's one jar. Inside of that, you have all your other jars. These are not exploded. We don't explode them into the global namespace like a lot of these other plugins do. So there are jars inside of a jar. This is a natural vehicle for a cloud, right? If you go to a cloud family or a Roku, it's very natural to just, they want to manage the process. They don't care about Tomcat, which then wants to manage a WAR. They don't care about a JBoss, which then wants to manage the E, right? They want a process. So this is the same on Heroku, same on Cloud Foundry, same on many of the different platforms as a service. So that's what you get here. I mean, this is 35 megs. It's the entire application, all the security, everything. If you go to my GitHub, for example, there's examples there on. Go to examples.
Yes.
And you go to. I don't know. What are you looking for?
Oh, I mean, okay.
Bookmarks.
You okay?
Okay. What am I doing here? Java.
Wear your shoes.
Application data.
Wear your shoes.
See that? So I have here cores. I set up a filter, a servlet filter that turns on cores for you here. I registered an embedded servlet container customizer, which it turns on SSL and HTTPS, right? And of course, it wouldn't be very hard to turn on Spring Security. It's not very hard to turn on Spring Security and Spring Security OAuth, so I do that here as well. So if I were to compile this application, along with all the other stuff I did in this talk, you'd have SSL and HTTPS terminated services. You'd have cores, you'd have the CratchD shell, you'd have everything, all in that one jar. You could give that jar to anybody who's got a JVM, and they have your production application. It couldn't be simple, even if we tried. It just couldn't. If it can be, then I quit. I'm done. I'm done. Okay, now, that's about it. Thanks. Questions? So happy to answer them. Yes, sir. No, for the rest of the points. So the question is, can I change the metrics? Yeah, you can change things through JMX, for example. We don't support it with the endpoints that we run out of the box, but there's no reason you couldn't. Like I said, all this stuff is pluggable. Every piece of the machine is, you can disable it or augment it or change it outright. We have, as Uncle Bob Martin talks about when you define your framework, he says, a framework should be open for extension but closed for modification. You don't need to recompile Spring to change pieces. They're well known hooks and SPIs. It's all for and documented. Very good documentation. And I'm not saying, it's not like the regular Spring documentation, which is thorough, but honestly, this is actually very good, pragmatic, recipe-centric documentation. And by the way, I showed you all those guides as well. So, those two, you should be able to get where you need to go, and if that doesn't help, you have any know. Questions? Thoughts? Waste of time? Okay, maybe? Yes? Yes, sir.
Do you have a live reload?
Sorry?
Do you have a live reload? So you combine your class.
Oh, huh, great question. Oh, son of a gun. So do I have a live reloading thing? Yes, actually. We have something called spring loaded. Thank you for reminding me. Spring loaded. There's a gentleman who lives in Vancouver, I think, actually. He's here in Canada. And his name is Andy Clement. He's a monster. I don't even know. If you ever see him in Dark Alley, give him a hug. He's the most awesome guy ever. He, in 2009, I was trawling through the source code of Spring when they were moving to Spring 3, and I was looking at Git. I was looking at Subversion at the time, Subversion blogs, and we introduced the Spring expression language. The Spring expression language is something that's in the hot path of a lot of people's, applications. It's a superset of the sort of derpy JBoss expression language that you might know about, or the JSF expression language, or the JSP expression language. Very, very, very fast, very powerful. You can do a lot of cool things with it. In 2009, in 1 week, he added that expression language. It was based on an antler grammar. Antlers are, parser generator, like Lex and Bison for the steamroller. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. This is going to be so cool. Spring 3 is going to have an expression language. Next week, all that code is ripped out, and he wrote his own handbook. It's like, oh, okay, right. So he did a better job in 2 weeks of building expression language than the entire Johnny group could do in 10 years with JSF expression language. It's a little embarrassing, but whatever, I'll take it. Moving on. Later on, I discovered that all the new stuff that's being done in AspectJ is what he was doing. He's the reason that STS had Java 8 support. Our Eclipse distribution had Java 8 support a year ahead of the regular foundation, and why we have such great support for AspectJ and all this other stuff. He's also an Ironman. Do you guys know what an Ironman is? It's this triathlon where you run an insane amount of miles, swim an insane amount of miles, and then bike an insane amount of miles. So this guy is not somebody to be trifled with. He's a monster. He's crazy. And at one point in 2010, he and a fellow that the Spring Security lead, the founder, Ben Alex, he and Ben Alex went to this conference in the States called Java 1, where they sell Java effects to the few people that care about it. He went with Ben Alex and he had a talk. And one part of the talk, not even the whole talk, it was just a demo in the talk, was he wanted to show how easy it would be to create a really, really powerful class reloading mechanism, very similar to what Zero Turnaround has, something that they charge very successfully a lot of money for, right? And so for that demo, over the weekend, he built a Java agent that does everything that Zero Turnaround does. For a demo, for one demo, for part of a demo. It wasn't even the whole thing. And that piece, the core bit there is superior to what Zero Turnaround gives you. We don't have, to be fair, very fair, we don't have integrations with all these other frameworks, right? So what happens when you change the bytecode underneath the JVM? You swap out the bytecode for a class under the JVM, you got to tell Spring about it, you got to tell Hibernate about it, you got to tell Struts, you got to tell JSF, you got to tell all these other frameworks that keep state about the reloaded state of that class. We don't have that. But the core of it was just this thing he did for a demo. And that piece is now called Spring-Loaded. It's an open source project, you can use it. It's what powers the Ruby and Rails framework's live reloading feature. Very, very cool. And if you go to the documentation, you can see there's, we show you how to actually use the Spring-Loaded plugin with Spring Boot. So you can actually change a Spring ABC REST controller or a controller, and then just refresh the page and it works. So yes, we do. And if you ever get to meet the guy that did it, just give him a hug. He's the coolest guy ever. He's one of our mad scientists, and I love him. It's so cool. So cool. So yeah, great question. Any other questions? About him? About Andy Clement? That guy's amazing. Okay, guys. Well, thank you very much for coming. I hope this was informative. Yes, no? Informative? Helpful?